Frankenstein. My name is Victor Frankenstein. My father, Alphonse, came from Geneva. He met my mother when his best friend Beaufort died. Beaufort left his daughter, Caroline, with no money. Where could she live? My father found her a room in his cousin Louise's house. 2 years later, he married her. After they married, my father took her to Germany, France, and Italy. I was born in Naples, and for some time I was their only child. One day, when I was about 5, my father was away in Milan. My mother and I visited Lake Como. Near the lake, we saw the house of a poor family. The man and his wife had 5 children. 4 of these had dark hair and eyes. The fifth, a quiet young girl, had beautiful yellow hair and blue eyes. My mother always wanted a daughter and was interested in this little girl. When my mother spoke to the poor woman, she told her the girl's story. Elizabeth Lavenza, that was the girl's name, was the daughter of a German woman and a Milanese man from a good family. When she was born, her mother died, so her father left her with the family by the lake. The poor woman gave the child a bed, milk, and love, and the girl's father gave her money for that. But then the Austrians took him and put him in prison, and he died there. Now the girl had no family and no money, and things were far from easy for the poor family. My mother felt sorry and spoke to the woman. After that, Elizabeth came and lived in our house. I played with her and called her cousin. I was a year older than her, and she was more than a sister to me. After my younger brother Ernest was born, my mother and father took us all to Switzerland. We had a town house in Geneva, but lived mostly in a country house in Belrive by the lake. I went to school and made friends with one of the schoolboys. His name was Henrik Clervaux, and his father had a shop in Geneva. I was a happy child. This was before my life changed, before things went wrong. When I was about 13, I found and began reading a book by the old alchemist Cornelius Agrippa. There are many better writers, my father laughed, but I found the book interesting, and when I finished it, I read books by different alchemists. Perhaps one day I can stop death and people can live for hundreds of years, I thought. Then I can be rich and famous. My youngest brother William was born about that time. When I was 15, I remember a big storm on the lake that one night. I saw the white lightning in the dark sky. And then, suddenly, some lightning hit a big old tree by the lake and broke it in two. A famous science teacher was at our house in Belgrave at the time, and he told me all about lightning. Suddenly, the science of today was more interesting for me than books by dead alchemists. When I was 17, I finished school in Geneva, and my father told me, "Now you must go and learn at the University of Ingolstadt." Before I could leave, Elizabeth was suddenly ill with a fever. She nearly died, but my mother sat by her bed and looked after her. After 3 days, Elizabeth was well again and could get out of bed, but my mother now had a fever badly. She called Elizabeth and me to her and spoke quietly to us. "Victor, I'm dying," she said. "Please marry Elizabeth." I wanted to see that happy day, but my husband must see it now. "And Elizabeth, please look after my young children. Now I must leave you. Perhaps we can meet again in the life after death." Soon after that, she died. I left Elizabeth, my father, and my brothers in Geneva and went to Ingolstadt. Henry Clervaux wanted to go to university there too, but his father said no. Work was more important than university for Henry's father. So I began my student life without Henry. I took cheap rooms in an old house in town when I arrived. Next day, I met 2 important university teachers, Monsieur Krempe and Monsieur Waldman. Monsieur Krempe laughed at my talk of alchemists. I didn't like him. Monsieur Waldman didn't laugh, and I liked him a lot. Through him, I began to be very interested in science. I looked carefully at lots of dead bodies. What makes life? What brings death? In the end, I found the answers to these 2 important questions. After that, in my rooms in town, I began to make a creature from parts of dead bodies. I worked day and night. My face was now white and I was ill. I forgot my family, my friends, and my teachers for months. One November night, when there was a storm in the sky, I finished. The creature on the table before me was suddenly alive. He opened one big yellow eye and looked up at me. Ugh, I cried. I felt afraid and ran from the room. After some hours, I met Henry Clerval in the street. What are you doing here, my friend? I asked him. I arrived this morning. I'm a university student, he answered. My father said yes in the end. But what's the matter? Are you ill? I'm tired from work, I said. Then let's go to your rooms and at once, said Henry. Is the creature waiting there? I thought. But there was no creature when we arrived. I went to bed at once. I had a fever. Henry stayed and looked after me for months. When I was well again, Henry put a letter from Elizabeth into my hands. I read it with interest. Cousin Victor, Henry tells us all about you. You're well now, and I'm happy for that. Here, your brother Ernest is now 15 and little William is 5. Your father is well, and we have a new person in the house, Justine Moritz. Her family is dead, and she now lives with us. She's a nice young woman and a good servant, too. Please write soon. Elizabeth Lavenza. Chapter 2. William and Justine. I took Henry to the university the next day. It wasn't easy. When I met my teachers, Monsieur Kremp and Monsieur Wallman, I didn't feel good. And when they talked of science, I felt very ill. Because Henry was a student of languages, I decided to change to languages too. After that, I felt a lot better. So Henry and I learned languages at the university. I wanted to go home to Geneva in the last days of the autumn, but the weather that year was bad, with lots of snow and cold nights. So in the end, I stayed in Ingolstadt for the winter. With the new year, I began to think again of visiting my family. But before I left for Geneva in the spring, Henry and I went for a week to the mountains near Ingolstadt. The mountain walks were good for me. I loved the green country, the blue skies, the warm sun, and the beautiful spring flowers. But when we came back to Ingolstadt, there was a letter for me from my father. I read it quickly and felt afraid once more. Victor, my son, I have some very bad news for you. Your brother William is dead. Yesterday evening, he and Ernest went walking in the open country at Plainpalais. William ran away, and Ernest couldn't find him. We looked for him all night. Then at 5 this morning, I found him, dead under a tree. Someone killed him and took his locket with a picture of your mother in it. Come home soon, dear son. Elizabeth, Ernest, and I need you here. With love, your father, Alphonse Frankenstein. I left for Geneva at once, but when I arrived it was dark and the town gates were not open, so I took a boat across the lake to Plainpalais. There was a very bad storm that night, with lots of rain and lightning. William, this storm is for you, my brother. The weather's angry about your death, I cried. And then I saw something under some trees in front of me. It was my creature, the monster from my student rooms in Ingolstadt. What's he doing here? I thought, and then I suddenly understood. He's my young brother's killer, I said. He was. I knew it. I could feel it. Just then, the monster moved quickly past me and ran away to the hills. When they opened the town gates in the morning, I went to my family home and to bed. When I got up, my brother Ernest had more news. They've got William's killer, he said. What? But how? When did they catch him? Not him, Victor. Her. It's Justine Moritz. A servant found William's locket in her pocket the day after he died. She's in prison now. Just then, my father arrived. Justine isn't the killer, I cried. Ah, Elizabeth, too, thinks differently, my father said. But then who killed William? I couldn't tell my family about the monster. How could I talk about bringing life to a dead body? It was a mad story, and I didn't want to finish my life in a hospital for mad people, so I said nothing. That afternoon, Elizabeth and I visited Justine in prison. You aren't William's killer, Elizabeth said to her. Victor and I know that. But the next day, lawyers began questioning Justine. Where were you on the night of William Frankenstein's death? One of them asked. That evening I visited a cousin in a village not far from Geneva, Justine answered. When I came back to the town, I heard about William. I went and looked for him for hours, but found nothing. Then, because the town gates weren't open, I went and sat under a tree. Perhaps I slept for some minutes there, but then someone came near me, so I got up. Why was the locket in your coat pocket? The lawyer asked. Perhaps the killer put it there, Justine said. But why? And when? I'm sorry, but I don't know. There were more questions and more answers. Elizabeth spoke for Justine. She's a good young woman, a servant in our house, not a killer. I said nothing. In the end, I could listen no more. I went home and slept very badly that night. The next day, Justine told the lawyers, "You can stop questioning me. I was the boy's killer." Then the judge spoke. "Justin Moritz must die for this," he said. That evening, Elizabeth and I visited Justine again. "Justine, you're not William's killer. Why did you say that earlier today?" cried Elizabeth. "I'm sorry," answered Justine. "You're right. I didn't kill William. But the priest visited me many times and said, 'You killed this boy, you monster. Speak truly now.' In the end, I was tired, so I answered yes." Early the next morning, Justine was dead. Soon after that, we went to our country house in Belrive. I went for long walks. I often took a boat out on the lake. I wanted to forget the past months. Why am I here when William and Justine are dead? I thought. They did nothing wrong, and I killed them. Perhaps I can find death in the cold waters of the lake. But I stayed alive for Elizabeth, for my father, and for Ernest. Chapter 3. The Monster's Story. I needed to do something different, so I decided to visit the mountains near my home. Perhaps there I could forget sad things and feel better. First, I went on my horse up to the village of Chamonix. I saw cold mountain rivers, snow on dark trees, and tall white mountains in front of me. It was beautiful and I felt very happy. But the next day it rained and I felt sad once more. How could I change that? I know. I can go up Montanvert, I cried. I can look down on everything from there. So the next morning I began walking. At 12 o'clock I was far up the mountain. There was a glacier between it and the next mountain. I walked across. Then I sat down and looked back at Montanvert and Mont Blanc behind it. Suddenly I saw a man on the glacier. He was very big and he moved very fast on his feet. I watched him carefully. When he came nearer, I could see him better. He was my creature. I felt ill. "Go away," I cried. "I don't want to see you near me or my family again, you monster." "Why do you hate me?" he asked. "You made me." "What do you want from me?" "I want to tell you the story of my life. Please listen." "Never," I cried. "Then I must kill more of your family. Do you want that?" "No," I answered. "Tell me your story. I'm listening." "Not here," the creature said. "Come with me across the glacier. My hut, with a warm fire in it, isn't far. You can listen to me there." "Very well," I answered. So he went back across the glacier and I went after him. Soon we were in this little hut. I sat in front of the fire and listened, and the monster began his story. "When you first made me, I couldn't understand a thing. You looked at me with hate in your eyes and ran away. So I quickly left your rooms. I took a coat and some trousers with me. Soon I learned about day and night, hot and cold things, feeling hungry and thirsty, and the sun, the sky, and trees. One day some poor people left a little fire by the road, and I found it. It was nice and warm, and I sat by it. But when I put my hand in it, I cried because it hurt me. People were afraid of me. I soon understood. They screamed and ran from me when I walked into the villages, so I traveled by night across open country and stayed away from villages and towns. One cold winter night I found a little house in the forest with a hut by it. I went into the hut. From there I could see through a hole into the house, but nobody could see me. An old man, a young man, and a young woman lived in the house. They were very poor. They were often hungry, but the two young people always gave the old man the biggest dinner. I nearly cried when I saw that. From these poor people I learned language. The old man had one name, father. The young woman had different names, daughter, sister, or Agatha. And the young man had different names, son, brother, or Felix. I learned the names for fire, milk, and bread from them too. I could watch and listen to them happily for hours. They're beautiful, I thought. One day, soon after that, I saw my face in the water of a lake near the house. I hated it because I wasn't beautiful. When spring arrived, Felix worked in the garden. He brought the first spring flowers when they came and gave them to his sister, but his face was very sad. On Sundays, the family didn't work. The old man played his guitar and his children listened. I learned something more about the old man then. He was blind, but he could hear very well. One Sunday, when Felix and Agatha listened to their father's guitar, someone arrived at the door. He was a beautiful young woman in a dark dress. Safi, smiled Felix when she came into the house. Before Felix was sad, but now he was happy, and his sister and father were happy with him. Soon I understood something. Safi spoke a different language from the old man and his daughter. She needed to learn French, and when Felix taught her, I learned with her. I learned about Safi's story too. She was the daughter of a Turkish man and an Arab woman. Her mother was dead, and the French government put her father in prison for nothing. But the old man, Monsieur de Lacy, was a rich friend of the family. With his son Felix's help, Safi's father got out of prison and left France. Felix met Safi then, before she went away to school in Italy, and began to love her. But when her father was back in Turkey, the French government heard of it. They angrily took all of their de Lacy's money and came after them, so the family quickly left for Germany. Poor Safi looked for them in Germany for months before, in the end, she found them.